Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Often Wrong. Today is part 4 of What We Got Wrong. We are unpacking the last block of episodes and walking through all of the themes that really go in and out of everything we talked about. So stick around and let's get into it.
Hey, listeners, thank you so much for joining us again for this episode of Often Wrong. If you are enjoying how this season is rolling out, you can engage further by liking, subscribing, leaving a comment on wherever you listen to your podcast or on our website at carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong. From all of us at Often Wrong, thank you so much, and let's get back into the show. Welcome back to Often Wrong.
How's it going?
It's going real good. How are you doing?
You know, I'm good. I'm excited to talk about what we got wrong and this block as a whole because we had some good episodes and
I really liked it, but I will say, I'm always asking for feedback, but I do want to preface this one by saying not too much on my girl Claire, because the day that we're recording this, it is Claire's birthday. So really everything that she says kind of by law has to be correct. So, I just want to start there, but I mean, you can still give your feedback in the comment sections of wherever you're listening or at carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong. But again, extra grace for Claire because
so Lisa's gonna just absorb the often part of the often wrong, and I'm gonna absorb none of it. Anything I say today is Bible, and thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, setting the right tone. It's a new moon and my birthday. And
she's older and more wiser than she's ever been.
Yes. And I look forward to exerting that wisdom over you today.
Thank you so much. I need
You're
it.
welcome. Yeah, you're welcome. Well,
we had a cool block.
We did. And, I'm wondering, what did you think about this block? Was there anything that stood out to you broadly? Specifically?
Definitely. Well, I feel like I love this because I know that when we planned what these episodes were going to be, we did want them to have a connection, but there is like other connections emerge as we do it. And I think that's really exciting and interesting. It kind of like confirms the path we were on. So I feel like, like one thing, like how all of these 4 episodes really were kind of looking at in different ways how when something feels wrong for us and how sometimes we can blame a person or blame ourselves instead of looking at the structure that caused that issue to happen in the first place. So I love how that came out in different ways in this 4 episode block.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's fun to like pull out all of the themes that go together, even with like very different topics like addiction and the 2-party system, and then be like, oh, actually, there's stuff at the heart of this that's like similar. And, I love that kind of what you were saying, the like personal versus structural levels of this. And when something feels wrong, what we blame, like, do we go straight to the individual, whether that be another person or ourselves, or do we interrogate the structure automatically? And I think more often than not, it's way easier to go with the person and lose that sense of perspective.
To do it that way.
Yes, definitely. And it feels immediate, and it's like, I mean, it's daunting to try and understand the structural reasons why we're in a situation and, and then be like, oh, maybe this didn't have to be this way. And it's way easier to just partake in, some self-flagellation and.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think there's so many things here. It's like, the structure of this government, the structure of our economy, the structure of spirituality, monoliths, or the structure of movements, and you can confuse so many things while you're doing that, whether that's like confusing control for care, or shame feels like it's accountability, or performance feels like telling the truth. And I feel like that's really interesting because those traps, while I feel like they're natural and it makes sense that we would go to those things because they are the easier answer, But the answer is that this isn't an answer. And, you know, I feel like it'll feel like you're doing the right steps to get towards the future that you want. And then you get to this place where you're like, why doesn't this work?
Yeah.
I'm doing all of these things. I'm shaming myself. I've taken
Definitely.
control over everything. I have performed perfect living. Why isn't this
Yes.
working? Because it's not true.
Definitely. 100%. Yeah. I think before we get into it, maybe it would be helpful to bring this thread through each of the 4 episodes in a more targeted way.
Yeah.
Shall we?
Yes. Actually, okay, before we do that, I was one thought
Yeah.
that I had. I've been talking to a couple of people about this, especially recently. And it's about kind of like the deeper structural problem that we're facing, which I think is a perfect thing to say at the top of this episode.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see more people engage, which I think we mentioned in the last episode, of people trying or stepping into the foray of talking about the way the government is. Or, you know,
Yeah.
it's like you're in this place where you realize something's wrong, but you haven't really done that work yet.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that you have to, but I was wondering about that. And I'm like, I think it's hard when you recognize that something is really wrong. It's really painful.
Yeah.
And I can understand the hesitation to go deeper into understanding what it actually is. But I wanted to, before we get into this episode, if you're listening to this and if you feel that way, where you're like, oh my God, it's so big, it's so much worse than I thought. That is true. It is worse than you thought. However, I also feel there is something on the other side of it. I feel a little bit, not like I'm completely on the other side of it, but like it does give you a little bit of freedom when you start to untangle yourself from this bigger picture. So it feels like it's going to be all bad when you realize how entangled all of these things are. But there is a very big silver lining there where you get to see that it's not your fault and you can still live and you can still make choices that were not prescribed to you. So I just wanted to start with that, just so that
I love that.
know, it might feel overwhelming, and it is, but there is a reason for it, and there is something that will come of it.
And there's freedom in it, I think is the right, you know, framing. I agree.
Totally.
I think that's very well said. So as we look back on this block, we have episode 16, the good old 2-party system. And, you know, we started by naming how the systems we're expected to trust, like democracy, are often structured around these false choices. And when the powers that be only give you 2 lanes, it's not really a choice. It's not like, oh, you have choice. It's they have control. And that episode was really about structural binaries and what they flatten, what they erase, what they prevent, and how they limit us and limit our thinking and limit movements. And to me, it's really an interesting moment to reflect on, okay, like how is that showing up in my personal life? And then going into episode 17, the falsehood of individual responsibility, we went deeper and we went into what happens when the system fails and blame gets handed to the individual, which again, inherently linked to the 2-party system. But we really traced how institutions, corporate, cultural, religious, you know, kind of offload accountability while training us to self-manage, self-discipline, self-blame, and, you know, really trying to get to the root of, okay, what's actually ours to carry? What are we actually responsible for here? Mm-hmm. I think, again, those two are intrinsically linked. And then I think this really goes well into addiction and something I want to talk about today, kind of more so like how we get here and then what we do. But do you want to talk about the themes we explored in the next 2 episodes?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a lot about, starting with like this false choice of the two-party system, then getting into like this falsehood of individual responsibility. Then that makes perfect sense that we're now in this place that's talking about, loneliness, pain, disconnection. All of those things are the same thing. And how this kind of like, oh, it's up to you to take care of yourself might lead to maladaptive behaviors and responses like addiction. So it like goes together so well, where you are kind of being forced to like run at full speed and take care of yourself as quickly as you can, which sometimes might look like bad habits.
Yeah.
And I think even then you get to a place where, there's a mess. You've been reacting to a mess with more mess. And now we're in a place where you can perform on your social media and show that you have it all together. Yeah. Including like your relationship, your dinner, and also your political opinions.
Yes.
And so all of these things I feel really tie together, where you are misrepresenting yourself because you didn't even really get a chance to look at yourself.
Yes.
And really realize what the real choices are and what is actually yours. So I love the through line there. And it's just this, how do we build something different? And that's like what we talked about in this last episode of like, the only way to build something different is to be in community with each other. And so, I say, let's get into our further thoughts. Like, is there anything that you think we missed? Anything that we got called out on? Starting with the good old two-party system.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear any negative feedback about this episode yet.
Me neither. I think so. A couple things. And I just want to also say, I think maladaptations is a great word for what we're experiencing. And, looking at, okay, how'd we get here? How'd we get here? And how is this showing up? That's a great kind of thing to frame it around. Before we go into the 4 episodes in specifically, so much of what my reflections have been, and like in talking with people who've listened, I think like there's a lot of stuff that just bumps for me across all of the episodes. So ideas about belonging, about separation, like all of these things kind of touch each of the episodes, I think. And so with your blessing, which is something that I always say, and Lisa makes fun of me for it, but it's my birthday. So, Lisa, with your blessing, I would like to go episode by episode, but also bring in the other episodes as we're talking about different ideas.
I would love, definitely.
Great.
There's
Wonderful.
no way to do it, honestly, without doing that.
I think we have to. And
so full birthday blessings on that.
Thank you. Yeah. And for whatever reason, this block just feels especially connected to me. They all always do. But like this almost tells a story in an interesting kind of way.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I'm excited to get into it. So episode 16, two-party system, most structural of all of our episodes, for sure.
Yes.
This was an episode you and I got both very heated during.
Yeah. That was the first episode where I got mad.
Yeah. Talk to me about that.
I feel like this episode makes me so mad. This also kind of reflects how I feel sometimes in conversations with people who are not on the same page as me about how I see the world and how I see the government. Because to me, some of these things are very obvious, and I forget that not everyone has gotten there yet. And I don't know. It's like I have this thing where I saw this thing on TikTok where this guy was saying like, this is what you do when you have someone who's like trying to be like racist or like give like MAGA propaganda to you. Just say level 1. And it will piss them off. And I was not talking. And I just kept thinking about that. I'm like, no, that literally is the feeling. I'm like in a conversation and I'm like, oh, level 1. I hate it. But it's extra frustrating and makes me extra mad because it's not everybody's fault that it is like this. It was set up for us to have to fight through these understandings. So it's like a double frustration where I'm just like, this is so stupid. It's so obviously bad. But then also being like, God, you're so good at doing this. I hate it. I hate that we are even having to break this down.
Yeah.
But we do have to. And that honestly, even that is a great connection to the next episode about individual responsibility. Because I'm like, you have bad opinions and you're not seeing the forest for the trees, but it was designed that way. So how can I be mad at you?
That's the point, right? It's very difficult to I think once you understand that and embody it, it's hard to really be mad at an individual for their beliefs unless they are actively perpetuating harm against others. That is not a belief. Like that no. Like you're just not good. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a different thing entirely, but like if you get to the actual point where again you're putting it out into the world that you're like harming others,
Yeah.
that's never okay. But yeah, I think this is very interesting. And again, great segue into falsehood of individual responsibility. It feels, I want to talk about a few things here because I, well, a number of things. I think we have this pervasive sense of inadequacy that is,
Yeah.
again, put onto us by like
Capital
larger
C.
institutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And systems and structures. And we're never going to be able to be adequate and we're never going to be able to meet those. But we take it and we say, oh no, like this is on me. And then we
Mm-hmm.
start to have this really terrible self blame and self loathing and all of that that comes. And I got to thinking about this in terms of the Abrahamic religions. And I was actually listening to a podcast by Tara Brach, who I think I've mentioned before
Mm-hmm.
on this podcast. I love her. But, she was talking about how the Abrahamic religions, like, we're told we're bad, we're wrong inherently, and we're sinners. And there's a judging God with a message that we are these inherently flawed people and that needs to be controlled. And so what I took that to be at the baseline of things, it's this, okay, well, we're already screwed. And there's this judging God. It's like top down, like we're, having to measure up. But then we have these religious institutions that come along and they say, oh my gosh, yes, you're really fucked up, but don't worry, like we have the answers. And if you just do what we say, like you'll be good, you'll be fine. And that makes us dependent on their structures and their rules. And we start to then tie our goodness and our redemption and like our self-worth in with them. And so it's again these structures that maintain control over, are we actually good? Are we enough? Are we, XYZ? So
You know what? That just made me think about something that I hadn't made the connection. I'm sure people have made this connection before. Work is like the same thing. Where it's like you are nothing, you are unemployed, you're nothing until you get hired. And then when you get hired, you have to meet with your manager every week and they'll tell you if you're doing good or bad. And then they'll decide when you're ready for the next step. And you have to just wait on this like kind of outside structure to tell you when you're good enough. And it's based on nothing. It's very like random. And it's kind of this, it reminds me of in a lot of ways of different religions because you can be Christian and go to 4 different types of Christian churches and the rules are different. And so it's just always this outside thing. And this isn't to say that religion or spirituality is bad.
No.
It's just looking at kind of the similarity in structures that I don't think I noticed that until you were explaining that. And I was just thinking about work the whole time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, again, I grew up Roman Catholic. I think the Catholic Church is a phenomenal example of institutionalized religion gone to an extreme in some ways. I, like again, the church as an institution, it has so much power over people's lives and over what people think. Like the term Catholic guilt is not arbitrary. It's a very real thing.
No, my wife apologizes for things all the time. I think it's so odd.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, you just have this inherent sense of, I'm wrong, I'm flawed, I'm fucked up, and I'm constantly trying to redeem myself. And even though, in Christianity, there's the idea Jesus died for our sins, so we don't have to atone in the ways that he did, which he didn't. Oh God, my Sunday school education is really going out the window right now. I'm not even going to try to continue on this, but I think it's very interesting. And from
It
an
is very
institutional
interesting.
level, this placement, this over indexing on individual responsibility
Mm-hmm.
is it's a lot to bear. It's a lot to bear. And they want to keep us overwhelmed so we continue to rely on them. Right?
Yeah. So even the thing that is, good and, can enrich your soul and whatever religious path you take, it still a lot of times can reinforce the structure that is making you feel bad in the first place.
Yes, exactly. Well said.
Well, this is one thing. One thing that I got from a listener in a note was about this episode and how they were saying this episode touched a nerve in a good way. And I love to hear that. And she was saying how she always is like going through life and being like, yeah, see, I'm not susceptible to propaganda. I totally see what's going on. And then listening to this episode was like, oh my God, the final boss, it's me.
Yeah.
I am like holding myself to all these standards. Like I need to fix all of these things and I need to get everything exactly right. But realizing that that is also big propaganda. And I thought
Yes.
I was really glad to hear that because I'm like, that's what I hope these conversations do is just, even if it's not, I don't want you to take everything that Claire and I say and it's like now your opinion, but it is just a way to like open up like there's another lane that I could take my mind down sometimes.
How you're thinking about things, how you're relating to things. Like, we could care less if you adopt what we say, which honestly, like, don't adopt what we think. Like,
No, argue with us. Tell us.
argue with us, but like form like how we're thinking about things and the like importance of critical thinking and engaging with things in a way that is feeling first, heart forward, but also like eyes wide open. I think that's really important. And that is 1,000 times more important than us making a good point about immigration or something. Like,
Yeah, because it's broader.
definitely.
It's like,
I think that's a great note from that listener that we got.
yeah. And I think listening back to this episode, I think I mentioned this in the episode too, where I was talking about the nonprofit that I used to have, where I taught social emotional learning and yoga in schools. And I also did professional development for teachers in the same way. And a lot of the times I got hired to teach self-care to teachers. And that was really interesting. But I feel like in the years passing that, I feel like that really informs where I'm coming from on this episode about individual responsibility because I felt really good teaching that in some ways. I'm like, I do want you to know that with your body and for free, there are ways that you can soothe yourself.
Yeah,
That should be free information and we should all know it. It's very helpful.
absolutely.
But just like we were talking about how you get all these self-help books to deal with structural failure, you can't deep breath your way out of system failure. You can't. You can feel better in your body and about yourself, but it's not going to fix anything. And I feel like that was a shift that if I could go back in time, I would frame it that way and say, like, you should have these free tools to take care of yourself. That should be a priority. But also, it is not your fault that you feel bad. And I feel like that might be equally as helpful as heart belly breathing.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. I think that's great. Yeah. And, I think as we think about this falsehood of individual responsibility, if we have so much on us and we feel like we're blaming ourselves and then we're relying on these structures that don't actually inherently support us back or make us feel like we belong, we continue to experience this pain of separation, isolation, self-blame, etc. And this, I think I did mention Tara Brach in the addiction episode, actually, because she has some really masterful words on what she calls the habits that imprison our spirit. But, she talks a lot about essentially addiction as a maladaptation to the pain of separation and having like the pain of being separate from each other, from, I'll throw out universal consciousness. We come into the world, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we're in this like solo body and everything's separate. And as we continue to experience disconnection and that pain, we start to seek belonging. And, really in our Western culture, we have very few ways of belonging. We get really attached to these external indicators of belonging: body image, success, substance use to feel community, etc., status
So true.
of, buying certain things and wanting the best, or, academia, or, whatever it is, we start to conflate the status within these things with belonging, and try to supplement that and to ease the pain. And this can lead us down some really harmful roads, I think. And it's an interesting experience, because this reinforcement of your individual responsibility and oh, you're on your own, it's this. And then you have this like continued separation and disconnection. And then you're able to be like, oh my God, something's wrong with me, because something's wrong, but all I can kind of see is just me. So something must be wrong with me. And then we start to try and adapt to that. But oftentimes we get these, awful experiences, and we try to, cling to whatever's in front of us, or ease the pain of this disconnection or the pain of the separation, when really, in many ways, the answer is connection. The answer is community. The answer is, belonging, finding that, really. But it's very hard to do. It's very hard
I
to
think
do.
that's so correct. This is actually something I thought about right at the beginning when we started talking about this, is especially if you're connecting all these things to capitalism, which you should be, the place that does capitalism the best, where's that? The United States. Where's the place with the highest level of addiction? Also the United States. And I feel like that makes so much sense, because I feel like there's a thing, being in Mexico, there's always like so much chatter about, a lot of it is propaganda about, drug trafficking from from Mexico or Latin America in general into the US. But even the president of Mexico will keep saying, like, we don't have a drug problem. You do. And I think that that's so interesting. And it's so interesting to watch how these things play out, and just like the way that a culture is set up and how it will lead to these specific speed train down this path. And then we have multiple issues.
Yes.
Which actually is exactly what I would say. Because like what you're talking about, this maladaptive behavior, you build up these habits to ward off this distress. And then it goes on and on until you realize that you're still suffering. You didn't notice because, you had power over the thing that you were doing. And now you have two problems instead of one.
Yeah.
So I feel like for just as a culture, we started off with like this disconnection, this like struggle, this turning all of blame to yourself. And then now this response of this major, massive public health crisis of addiction in the US. And it's like now we have all of these problems that are actually the same problem.
Yes. Well, and we have, that's so true and so resonant. And what really, when this can go really haywire, is when somebody decides to exploit this. And, like the opioid crisis is a very specific exploitation of what was already there. Like the Russian hack of the 2016 election was a very specific and targeted strategy to exploit what was already there, this disconnection, this, wedge in between. And, something else that I find very interesting, I see like in American culture, and we are such a diverse nation. It's so beautiful. We're a melting pot with so many different subcultures. And what I have seen, like with the cultural appropriation stuff, which, I have some feelings on generally, like, I think that people got, again, a little bit too reactive to things and being like, oh, that's cultural appropriation. And like, one of my best friends, like, was using, I think, Palo Santo. was it Palo Santo? It was something. And he's Scottish. And people were like, oh my God, that is cultural appropriation. And he was like, my Celtic ancestors have used this for generations. So,
Yeah.
like, can you?
Well, yeah, it's like
stop?
focusing too much on the division instead of
Yeah, exactly. And like to me,
realizing that there's crossover, especially in
yeah,
indigenous practices. So,
definitely. And I like to, with my rule of thumb with cultural appropriation is like, I follow the money. So if you are profiting from exploiting another culture that is not yours, I think that's pretty clearly appropriation. But like, you know, again, there's a nice thing that can happen when we can share respectfully. But I have noticed that I'll say white Americans who've been here for a little bit, not like first gen new people, have a hard time getting their foothold in culture. And so they cling to other cultures, right? Like Black culture is a great example because Black culture has built the United States. And most of American culture, what's really worth looking at and what's worth celebrating is Black, like, and came from Black people. So we hold on to that and we're like, oh, but that can be mine too because I have no culture. And
it's crazy that you're saying this right now.
Yeah.
There was something I was going to say that
Yeah.
I was like, well, I don't know if I need to say this, but because
Yeah.
you brought this up, I will.
Yeah.
There's this whole argument. I've read like several books about this, and it's really about how white American culture is only colonization and violence. That is what the culture is. And it was set up that way.
Yeah.
And you have to keep adding, like even right now in the census, they're changing it so that you mark off still like, is this person Hispanic or Latina? And, but then they have removed, like in the race category, it's only like Black, white, Asian. And they're like, well, wait, I'm none of those. And it's because they're trying to absorb Hispanic white people into the white census to keep the number high. And that just happened this year. So it's like something like that, where it's like this, if you have a culture that's based on colonization and violence, that is not the fault of every individual white person. However, then you get to a place now where when it feels like that's slipping away, the reaction is violence and colonization because that is the culture. And that's
really
unfortunate. And it's because it's kind of whiteness isn't real. So it had to be compiled and then flattened because it couldn't be like Irish traditions, Scottish traditions, like, you know, old world Swedish family customs got passed on. It became whiteness, which is nothing. And that is a problem. It's a problem for white people too. Like, geez.
No, for sure. And as a white person, I will say it's a very sad problem to have. Like, and again, this is not to point the finger at any individuals. This is a cultural, like systemic structural problem that has been engendered over generations. Like whiteness is nothing. Whiteness is not culture. Like
there's nothing to it except for this bad part, and nobody wants that part.
Exactly. Nobody wants it. But we all want to feel like we belong. We all want to feel like we're a part of something. And when you are disconnected from your roots, your ancestral, you know, the ancestral knowledge that we all have in our lineage, like that's a really big shame. And like I've been fortunate enough, at least with my like Celtic heritage, I know a lot about it. And my family on my mom's side is very Scottish. My family on my dad's side is very Italian. And I've gotten to know a lot of that. And the Celtic side is a lot more like celebrated because the Italian side was like, they came in, they had to assimilate immediately and like throw culture out the window. And so, you know, but we have Italian American culture in my family. Like that's just what it feels like. And so I'm fortunate in that way, but like I've seen so many other people like a few too many times removed from something, and the culture is okay, well this is the dominant culture, it's just whiteness. And it's nothing. Exactly.
Yeah. The culture is just the domination. That's it.
Yes. And at best, it's an amalgamation of a lot of other cultures. At middle, it's nothing. And at worst, it's violence. Like, what a damn shame. And again, I think the answer to this is belonging and cultivating community and
Yeah, the
connection.
antidote to almost everything is community. This is actually something too. I wanted to talk about this within the addiction episode because I saw this the other day and I didn't back this up, but I like it because it sounds hopeful. But it just said that 75% of people in the US who experience addiction will also experience recovery. It doesn't say they will be recovered for the rest of their lives because what does that even mean? But that 75% number I think is really beautiful and I don't think it gets talked about enough.
That's lovely.
Just like this reminder that it's possible and you can take back your life by putting your life in with other people's lives.
Yeah.
And also, there was one other thought that I had too about the addiction episode that I don't think I mentioned this topic. But this is something I realized recently because I was saying, about honesty, about telling people before the problem gets out of hand. But I wanted to clarify it because I feel like this could be almost wrong, where it's like, be thoughtful about who the people that you're telling are.
Yeah.
Because there was one thing as a lesbian, there was a long time in my 20s where like half my friends were gay men and, the others were lesbians.
Yeah.
It took 8 or 9 years into dealing with this directly with a friend to realize that a lot of gay men are doing crystal meth. I had no idea. We were going to largely many of the same parties. We were doing the same things. We hung out all the time. We told each other everything, but not that. But they all knew, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
And when it kind of came to the surface, they'd be like, oh yeah, if you ever see like on a party invite where it says party, that means meth. And I was like, what? There's just like signs everywhere. And now I can't unsee it. But it's like stuff like that, where it's like, if you're telling people who you're like, oh, well, you love taking shots and so do I. There's nothing wrong with that, right? That's not the right person to safely talk about this with. They might be, you should still talk to them about it, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also like, be a little discerning about who that person is, because there are some people who just don't see it. And there's other people who want you to be there so that they are not alone for that same community reason that we're talking about. So I just thought that was interesting and like something worth stating.
Yes, for sure. And it's interesting because it's like within maladaptations, we have other maladaptations, like people who continue to enable addiction and others' addiction. And it's like, well, is it really your fault? Like,
right.
No. At the end of the day, no. Like, even it's really interesting. And, for whatever reason, I'm going back to the Catholic Church and like the child sex abuse scandal. Ooh. And what we have to look at is the systemic failures that led to no one saying anything and that made it so that these priests just kept getting moved around. But if a nun knew, the nuns had no power. Like, are we going to fully over-index on saying she said nothing, so, it's her fault. You said nothing, you knew. And, the victims said nothing. Like, that's the point of abuse also. It's just to get people to not say anything. And I don't know if there's a right answer. Again, like, I think there's a level of accountability, sure. But it's much, I think, stronger to point out the systemic failure and like what actually led to this at every level, rather than just over-indexing on the individual responsibility of it.
Absolutely. No, I think that's exactly right. It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
It's very hard. It's very
but
hard.
It really, it does come back to this thing. Actually, this reminds me of the older episode that we did about what you do, like how to safely crash out. And that idea of like figure out your network before it happens.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's it too, of like, you can talk about the system and the way that it is when you're not being acutely harmed by it.
Yeah.
Because it's harder when you are to be like, no, you did this.
Yeah.
You're not really necessarily going to be in the place to do that. But if you've already talked about it, you can start exploring it now when it comes for you, which all of these like systemic things are likely to. Mm-hmm. At least you've had this conversation already.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that feels like it goes together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. Do you want to take us?
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, I was going to say this can bring us to the next one because I think one thing that I think has shown up in this block too is about being honest and just like being really candid about your experience and what's happening with you, whether that's for addiction, whether that's because for your actual political thoughts and you need to engage with people to like do some real critical thinking instead of like soundbite regurgitating back and forth at each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really leads into the last episode about how we talk about social justice, especially online. And I actually wanted to talk about this. I wanted to mention this yesterday, but I forgot.
Last week.
I talk about this all of the time. Yes.
Yeah. Last week. You're giving away company secrets, industry secrets when we recorded these things. Good Lord. Wow.
I don't know what day it is anymore. Okay. I only know that it's your birthday, but it could be any time. But yeah, so yeah, there's a story that I always tell. This is when I'm consulting specifically for fundraising and talking about grants. This came up really early in my career doing this, where I would come into different nonprofits and I would help rewrite their grants. And this was in Philadelphia, and these were a lot of like school education, youth service programs. What I noticed is that in the needs statement of every grant, everyone would use the same statistic. And they would say, well, 100% of students in Philadelphia are on free lunch. And one, that didn't make sense because none of these programs were about food insecurity. So it was kind of weird. But the point they were trying to make was this is a low income city and they need this service. And this is how you show that it's a low income city because they're all on free lunch. So I get the reasoning for why they all did that. But at the same time, that statistic isn't even really true. It is, but it isn't. Like 100% of the kids were on free lunch, but the reason for that was not because everyone qualified. It's because the school district was so poor, they could not afford. It was cheaper to just give everyone free lunch than to do the study to find out who needed it. So this was just like a data point that was used, and it was used with good intentions, but it wasn't true. And it also had nothing to do with what these people were like. Your after school reading program has nothing to do with the fact that they are on free lunch. And so I just always thought that was really interesting. That really triggered kind of the way my career has gone since then, because I'm always just trying to like pick something apart and be like, what are you really trying to say? What's the problem? And what are you trying to do? Because we need to figure that out. It's very important. You are energized to do this work. Why, for whom, and when? Yeah. And that's what we need to get clear on. So I think that's like a bigger thing that can be placed in this conversation about how we all talk about social justice and how we talk about each other, because that's the same thing too, where instead of pointing to exactly what the problem is that you're trying to fix and how you're going to fix it, you might now also be just keeping people stuck because of the way that you talk about them. Instead of it being like, these kids deserve X, Y, and Z, this is where the district is falling short and this is how we're going to supplement it. That's a great, compelling thing. But instead you're just like, these kids are poor. Yeah. They need to go to the park for a program. Yeah. That's awful. It sounds like you're the only one who you're just like being nice and you're just like helping out these kids who can't afford lunch and taking them to the zoo. That's nice. Yeah. But what is that for? And I feel like that is a thing that I feel like could be course corrected in so many people. And I feel like if these nonprofits where these experts are running these things, your everyday person who works at, I don't know, the warehouse is also probably going to not be able to think past this either. So I just feel like this is important to share, that you can be more clear when you're talking about what the problem is, who did it, and how it can be fixed.
Yes. I think this, again...
That was my soapbox.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think it, again, just proves the honor specificity, honor nuance, go deeper, keep going. Like... when you think you've hit it, check again, like it might not be the full story. And look, there are instances where it's very difficult to portray the full story. Yeah. What comes to mind is, pieces of news that are, released and discussed in a segment type bite-sized way, or even, just any kind of article that like touches on something. What I would love to see more of is like, I understand that reporters will not always be able to give the entire full context of something, but I would love an acknowledgement of what's not there what's not included in this assessment, what's, also
Ooh.
up for consideration, I think that would be great and very helpful.
We were both journalism majors for a brief
Yes, we
time.
were.
And I want to know, we
Minor.
also went at different times. I'm very slightly older than you. But when I was in journalism school, that was one big thing. When we had to write pieces, it had to be so specific. It had to be a very niche thing because it wasn't supposed to be biased. You were supposed to be giving it, if you couldn't give the context for the full picture, your story was too broad and you need to narrow it down then.
Yeah.
Because it needs to all fit in here and it needs to be cohesive. And that was really important, and you would fail if you didn't do that. And that has completely left journalism as far as I can tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you guys learn that?
So I was studying journalism in 2016 and 2017 and 2018, which was a really awful time for journalists. And everything felt like it was under attack, and it was like, oh, good Lord. So a lot of my learning, I think, was overshadowed by, honestly, I remember a lot about AP style. I remember a lot about the current context of what I was learning in. And then I remember like certain beats that I did. I remember like the facts I learned. But overall, I think it was an interesting time to try and engage there. And I don't know. I think on the one hand, again, like you can't contextualize everything at one time, but yes, getting as specific as possible is actually a great way. Make it less broad. Like talk way more specifically. And
it's even like, for example, that the protest that just happened, the No Kings one, I thought that lacked specificity. And I feel like it led a lot of people to think that the whole problem was about the president, and it isn't. It's much larger than that. And he's just like a little wart on the problem. And I think it's just like, but that's the thing. It needed to be, this is what keeps happening, especially I see on social media, is that something happens or like a politician says one statement and then it gets applied to everything. And it's like, well, we don't actually need to do that. It is okay if you just get specific about one thing. It doesn't have to speak to the entire rest of it. It's not maybe that helpful. And we could just get clear on issue by issue.
Yeah. And my issue is when they feel the need to put the click-worthy thing up top, and then the nuance gets lost, or it's not even there, or like, it's one thing that's being reported on and you completely lose context and you're not getting the full picture because you can't. I think,
and that's how we get protest signs that say, if Kamala had won, we'd be at brunch.
Yes. Yeah.
We've lost it.
Yep. And oh boy, I just, it really gets my goat because, again, the 24-hour news cycle, and I feel like I was complaining about this already today. Oh God, I don't even remember who to, but I usually do complain about this. The 24-hour news cycle and the constant need to put things out and to drive clicks. Like, remember, these news organizations, for the most part, are for-profit businesses, for the most part. They center, getting clicks and impressions and all those things. And they're going to work the algorithm. They're going to work it in that way at the cost, I think, a lot of times of, journalistic integrity, which, look, I know so many journalists who I respect so much and have, just
of course,
amazing. Like, journalists are
most of them
amazing.
are in independent media, but
yes, most of them are in independent media. I also will say at the local level, like my family, my dad works at one of our local news affiliates in Colorado, and like the local teams are amazing. Like his is an NBC affiliate. It's awesome. And they immerse themselves in local culture, local happenings. Like it's hyper local. And that to me is like the gold standard for journalism in many ways. And then
For
also,
everything.
yeah, it really is. And that is so impressive to me. And I just wish we had that same kind of approach elsewhere and it wasn't sacrificed.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think, yeah, it does sacrifice journalistic integrity, but it also sacrifices the mental health of the people, which I feel like
Yeah.
we could very clearly see right now. And that's one thing also that I feel like was missed in our conversation about how we talk about social justice is the doom scroll. And I think for maybe our parents, the doom CNN
Yeah.
watching. Because we don't have cable, so none
Yeah.
of us are affected by this. But we do have thumbs and phones. And so I just feel like I remember this and I think this is worthy of sharing with the people because in 2016 that was such a rough time and yeah, like what was it? Like Philando Castillo. Like there was so many terrible things happening that year and I was online in the worst way. And I would I think I've said this before. I would fall asleep crying, I would wake up crying. It was just awful for me. And I really had to start making some boundaries on how I engage with social media, which doesn't always work, but it is helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing it now. And it's been happening for the past like couple of years. I'm seeing other people doing it. And you can see that like anguish coming through in like the little bit that they post. And that's hard to watch because I understand the feeling of like feeling like you need to keep scrolling and you need to stay up to date so that, if you don't know what's happening, you can't protect yourself. But the sad truth is knowing what's happening will not protect you. It just won't. And actually, it might do the opposite. It makes you weaker. It makes you less able to engage properly. And also, yeah, and I know that this is true because if mainstream media or social media, both of which are heavily intertwined with our government, if that constant deluge of news made you more prepared to fight back, would it be allowed?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So it is not that helpful. What is helpful and what you can do with these tools is build communities with each other. That's the thing that's going to protect you. But knowing every single thing, if you know every bomb that got dropped and every person that was lost, you are worse off, not better. And I understand
100%.
also the urge to like honor and witness, but at what cost and what does it save or preserve? And I don't know if there's much that it does. I feel like a good rule of thumb here is that if you start to feel overwhelmed and like there's nothing you can do and that it's like too much, you're probably going in the wrong direction and you need to like turn back towards the people that are near you.
Yes. Turn back towards your people, right? Like, yeah, 100%. Totally. I love that. And the people, but also your people. I think.
Because we need you. We need all these people.
Yep.
Like, you're going to get lost in this and like drown in the news sea and you don't need to and you shouldn't be lost to it because there's other stuff that we can do.
And that's a scary place to be lost. I don't want to be lost there.
Yeah.
No, thank you. That's yucky. Yeah. I think this is I think this is a really rich topic and one that we can go on about for a long time.
Okay, yeah. I just think, it's so rich. There's so much here. One big thing that I can think of that connects to other episodes in different blocks that we've done in the past. So if you haven't listened to them, I hope you will because I want you to hear it and I want to hear what you think about what we've said. And, as I've said before, this podcast, it's happening in real time. This is how we feel right now. I will not be surprised if I feel differently or have gone deeper on some of these things next month or next year.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I've noticed too is basically about what we were always talking about is that the problem isn't that there are divisions. Those can be good and they can be useful. It's just that we only name them and we don't really engage with them. And that comes back to the binary thinking thing. It comes back to the two-party system. It comes back to how we talk about other people and talk about ourselves. And one good example of this, we talked in our gay grievances episode about bisexuals complaining during Pride Month every year. And this year it has ramped up again and it's actually gone further, which I'm grateful for. And I feel like it really unlocked new ways, like the amount of rage within the community about it really unlocked new ways of thinking about things for me. And that is needed because we are the people who need to define how this goes forward, which we talked about, I think, last week. And So yeah, I think the answer isn't just in naming and competing. And we've always talked about like the Oppression Olympics. It's not
Yeah.
about that. It's about the answer to it isn't validating each other's struggles. It's about community. And
Yes.
I think that that will answer all of our problems all of the time.
A freaking man. Yes, absolutely. And you say community, I say connection.
Mm-hmm.
And, but inherent in community is connection. So, like,
Yeah.
I think we can kind of use those interchangeably, but 100%. I think that's so, so true. And yeah, if you find yourself seeking validation, instead seek community and
Yeah.
build it.
If you're seeking validation, you're wrong, actually. And you're seeking community. So
Yeah. Just find those people that make you feel
they're there.
at home and like you belong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited for this next block. I think we have some really great topics that we even started to touch on today, such as
Yeah.
propaganda and the mainstream media and other things that I do not remember right now. But I'm very excited
You're going to
and
like it.
you're going to like it. This is our last block of
25
season one,
episode season. Oh my God. We're
25
going into
episode
the final
season.
block.
Yep. And then our last episode will be what we got wrong and what we got right. And I think we'll
Mm-hmm.
probably touch on the whole season in that
Yeah,
episode.
definitely. So if you haven't
Which is
yet
exciting.
gotten to us in your comments, again, the comments that you leave in the platform that you're listening on or at
Yep.
carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong or on our Instagram at oftenwrongpod.
Yep.
If you haven't left a comment on any of our conversations yet, you still have time. We really want to hear from you. And I feel like we'll just have a banger of an episode where,
For
if you're
sure.
just like, Lisa and Claire are stupid. I hate everything that they say. Cool. I'm sure that's not true.
Yeah. But
How
don't
could
say
that be
that
true?
today on my birthday.
Yeah.
Not
But
allowed.
yeah, we want to hear from you. So we want to wrap this up nicely. We'll obviously come back for a second season, but this is our first big one. And
Yeah.
I'm really excited. What a milestone. We're almost
Me
there.
too. Woohoo. All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Talk to you later.
Bye. Often Wrong is produced by Lisa Nwankwo, Claire Cornetta, and Joe Abdella. This episode was shot and edited by Joe Abdella. Special thanks to Michael Drummonds. Often Wrong is a Carrot Impact podcast. Go to carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong to learn more.